we haven't moved very far in terms of our collective consciousness and how we try to evade dealing with the root sins upon which our country was founded. And this is an accessible entry point to try to invite people, I think, to engage in that conversation.
One Night in Miami is a 2020 film directed by Regina King, set on the night of February 25th, 1964. This film follows four famous men on a pivotal night of conversation as each is contemplating major personal, professional, and political decisions. The four main characters are Malcolm X, played by Kingsley Ben-Adir, Cassius Clay, aka Muhammad Ali, played by Eli Gorey, famous football player Jim Brown, played by Aldous Hodge, and father of soul Sam Cooke, played by Leslie Odom Jr. As we play Fly on the Wall for this imagined conversation, today we ask, who was this for?
So I was especially excited to choose this movie because it is directed by Regina King, who has a prominent role in season 2 from The Leftovers.
Yeah.
So we chose her as our connecting point in our 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon.
That's right.
And this is her directorial debut. I'll try my hand at just a very quick summary of what happens in this movie. We drop into each character's life as they are struggling with, bluntly, white people in some way, shape, or form. We start with Sam Cooke, Leslie Odom Jr. at the Copacabana, singing for a white audience who is not having him. We see him bombing up there. Then we see Cassius Clay in the ring. Yeah, the audience is just against him, I think. Like he's fighting.
I think in sports they're called a crowd.
They're a crowd. That's right. The crowd is against him, and there is a racialized element.
Spectators? I don't know. What do you call an audience in a sporting arena?
I think it's a crowd. I think it's the spectators. But
two theater nerds trying to figure out
Right.
what to call the people who watch sports.
Trying so hard.
Fans?
The fans. We see Jim Brown, and a scene that really worried me because rolling up in a familiar environment that would have been at home in The Color Purple or The Help, that famous Spanish moss that signals something kind of fucked up is about to happen. And he has this very pleasant conversation on the porch of somebody who has some connection to his family. Brown offers to help move furniture inside, and his conversation partner says, we don't let black people in the house. It's not delivered that way. It's delivered much more aggressively.
No, it is not.
And then we witness Malcolm X considering his break with the Nation of Islam. Then we watch these four men convene on Cassius Clay's championship fight with Sonny Liston.
Oh my
right?
God.
They are there to cheer him on, and they go to celebrate after he wins. They each have different expectations of what celebration is meant to be, but that is mostly dictated by Malcolm X, who has this security detail. He's a bit rightfully so paranoid that his life is about to come to an end because he's being followed or shadowed by Hoover's men, and so he sets this very contained space for this conversation in a motel room. Eventually we start getting into this conversation about what it means to be somebody with fame, power, and influence amid the backdrop of the struggle for civil rights, and what role someone ought to play once they have access to fame and power.
I think where this movie's structure is a little fast and loose is it both wants to be a film that is out in the world and filming at different locations. You're in the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami, and you're in an arena where you're watching a boxing match. You're all over, you're doing the film thing. But it also wants to be a play. It wants to have 3/4 of the film take place in a motel room where you're basically creating a bottle episode where you've stuck these four people with disparate views and you've locked them in and you're saying, okay, Tell us what's going on. So it wants to be both. I think that was the hardest part for me. I didn't actually want to see the outside world once I got the motels. I mean, the context was helpful and something that you need to get your audiences up to speed. Your audiences may not know the background of each of these four men. I understand the purpose and the function, and I probably would have done the same thing. But once we pivot to that conversation, that's really all I wanted.
Yeah.
I don't know what everybody else wanted.
Yeah. Well, and it was a play, right? Yeah.
I would hold the conversation that they're having at the level of interest to me at like 12 Angry Men.
Sure.
You have this great cinematic classic that is famously 12 men on a jury stuck in a room.
What put it on that level for you? Because that's high praise.
That's high
I'm
praise
just kidding.
coming from me, right? To me, it is the slow wading in of kind of a light jab from Malcolm to Sam, and then Sam kind of brushes it away, and Malcolm is like a dog with a bone. He just can't let it go. And he wants Sam to admit something that he thinks is true.
Can you dig into that a bit?
I mean, the way I interpret, and keep in mind, we are two white people in 2026 talking about a film that is rooted in a culture that neither of us belong to. My interpretation of this conversation is that Malcolm feels that in order to get equality, Black community needs to gather around itself and get solidarity on its own. Sam Cooke, his interpretation of what they should be working toward is, and at one point he says, my favorite line, everybody talks about wanting a piece of the pie. Well, I don't. I want the goddamn recipe. And so that to me is where the differences lie. Sam doesn't want to succeed apart from the culture. He wants to be a part of the culture, crack the code.
Yeah. And the question, I think, at the heart of it, maybe more so implied, is it seems like Malcolm X is trying to get Sam Cooke to admit that he's just being high-minded and maybe fearful of using his talent to do something that could be confrontational, that could lose him opportunities. And one thing that's really fun and a little wicked in this movie is the way that Malcolm X tries to use music to trap Sam Cooke. Malcolm X puts one of Sam Cooke's records on and makes him listen to his own lyrics and basically points out, like, it's pretty vapid, huh? And then he does it again. And then finally, he puts on Bob Dylan, someone who is speaking more courageously and honestly about the struggles of the group that he does not necessarily identify with. He's a white boy from Minnesota without a direct lived experience in struggle that serves as the backdrop for this point in history. And yet he's showing, according to Malcolm X, more courage, more lucidity, more willingness to take on these themes, and also, while taking that risk, experiencing some benefit that is not necessarily harming his career, even though he may be more so in the crossfires of the political zeitgeist. So it's a really tightly coiled trap that Malcolm X invites Sam Cooke to react to. And so, okay, obviously Sam Cooke is not the only person with internal conflict or struggle. Every character brings that to the equation. Malcolm X's is that he has been trying to functionally recruit Cassius Clay, and it's unclear.
To use like a Christian term, he's been like evangelizing him.
He's been evangelizing him, but he also, there's a political element to this, right? They refer to Cassius Clay with a somewhat objectified language. They refer to him as the ace up his sleeve. As Malcolm X is preparing for a split from the Nation of Islam into something of his own creation, he is kind of trying to have Cassius Clay follow him through that split to encourage others to follow suit, and has not yet shared that with Cassius Clay. And so we're not entirely clear on just how scheming Malcolm X may be in this scenario, just how self-driven this conversion on Cassius Clay's part might be, and whether this might be a necessary if cynical, choice to advance the struggle. I would actually argue that that's maybe at the heart of this whole movie is how do you struggle well? And what does it say about what's happening now?
There's a part of the conversation that really does feel a little like Sam and Malcolm are pulling at Cassius Clay. They're playing tug of war for his soul. He's on the rise in his career, just won this championship. He has solidified his reputation as a successful boxer. And Sam is like, you know, you can undermine their authority by just being the best you can possibly be and beating them at their own game. And Malcolm's like, you can be doesn't he use the word weapon at one point?
Yeah,
You can be a weapon in the
literally.
cause. And it was fascinating. I'm glad they included this moment where Cassius comes to Malcolm before the match and they pray together to show that Cassius is seeking not only this like political stance that comes with the Nation of Islam, but he is truly trying to figure out if he believes in the faith. And so Cassius, actually, most of his conversation for the entire film is struggling against, do I want to be a Muslim? Whereas Malcolm is very set on the political ramifications. While he's supposed to be a spiritual leader, he's more focused on the political ramifications of Cassius coming over to convert.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is the backdrop for a play that we went to go see at the Folger Theater through the Shakespeare Theater Company, Julius X. But they've recast the setting in Harlem with Malcolm X in the role of Caesar, right? After he goes on pilgrimage and he undergoes a political and personal transformation where he is softening some of what originally made him a major lightning rod in the civil rights movement. His level of extremity is so fascinating. If you go back and listen to some old Malcolm X interviews, there is no softness in the reference to the white devil or the insistence on a separate nation. And there's something to that version of radicalism that is really fascinating to pay attention to in a movement like this. But that starts to soften, it seems, a bit after his return from pilgrimage, and that also then leads to rifts as he considers leaving the Nation of Islam. How do these two in dialogue resonate for you?
So in Washington, D.C., there is a Folger Shakespeare library. And in the library itself, they have a theater that is designed to look like Elizabethan Shakespearean theater. It is a beautiful space, and they put on about 3 shows a year. And usually they will showcase a newly written play or something that is on the cutting edge. This play, Julius X, was actually premiered during their writer's room conference that they do as well, and was workshopped in Washington, D.C. The playwright took Julius Caesar, a play written by William Shakespeare in England in the 1600s, and updated it for modern 20th century United States, placed it in Harlem, and decided to take all of the characters from Julius Caesar and find their mirror image in Malcolm X and in his world. This is a very strange play that is actually quite beautiful, but you have to really, I was describing it to Tanner when we saw it as like a 301 course. You need to understand Julius Caesar and you need to understand Malcolm X in order to understand this play. It is something that you need a lot of context in order to understand the profound message it is giving. Go ahead.
Well, it's fascinating. You describe it as a 301 course, which I think is accurate, but it was a full house. I think it was, I didn't see an empty seat. It was a young audience, which is fascinating for theater, which is very rarely the case and rarely the case for Shakespeare. But I will say one note about the Shakespeare Theater Company is they have made a habit of taking Shakespeare's work and reinterpreting it through different societal movements. So there you'll have some that are simply maybe an all black cast, and others that will adapt the work to social movements, or there's this turning over of Shakespeare under the light that is
Yeah.
really fascinating. But what I've noticed is that in the shows where, so if we go to a traditional show, just a standard straight on reinterpretation of King Lear, the audience skews a few decades older than us. That
Yep.
is the average.
Yep, that's right.
But when there has been, so when we went to Macbeth in Stride, am I getting that right? Macbeth in
Macbeth and
Stride,
Stride. Yeah, good job.
which had like musical overtones. It was predominantly black cast and had again sort of a social critique element built in.
Yeah.
Young, diverse audience, and I even remember one of the stories that's featured often in the Shakespeare Theatre Company's motivations for doing this is one of their collaborators. I think is from like pre-apartheid South Africa, and noted that in schools when they were being forced to learn English, one of the few things that they were able to read was Shakespeare, and there was a mutual bonding and love over over Julius Caesar in particular because of the seeds in it that have not solutions but potential messages for someone who's in the middle of a struggle.
Yeah.
I wish I understood Julius Caesar, the play, well enough to know why that script
But
resonates so
you
well with someone in the middle
walked
of a struggle.
you walked out of Julius X being, I recall, you being curious about
Yeah,
how this lands in a 2020s landscape, and like thinking about the fact that this play was being put on literally in the Capitol's backyard for a predominantly young, diverse audience. So this is something that I think really, to your point, is making these truths that we have decided are pretty universally acknowledged across culture and time. I love that you reference Kunene and the King. That was two actors, one white, one black, in modern South Africa, struggling with their relationship with one another and using King Lear as the place where they came together, and they were able to kind of talk to each other through the language of this play. Something that, I think we're trying to have in these four men talking. We're trying to bring it back to like, what are universal truths? What has worked in the past? What hasn't worked in the past? How can we, as you say, struggle to change not just my fate, but the fate of the people around me? Why is this being made now? These are
yeah.
arguments we're still having 60 years later.
What does Julius Caesar have to say to somebody who's in the middle of a struggle, who might be in the thick of it?
Yeah, I think Julius Caesar is a play that is examining what can go deeply wrong when you charge full on ahead in your convictions and cause everyone around you to reflect upon where they stand in relation to your beliefs. Because Malcolm X, as you said, is a lightning rod. He
Yeah,
is somebody who you can't really have mediocre feelings about. You either feel very strongly that he is speaking out of this hurt and pain that this community has experienced, and he is a voice leading them out of this subjugation, or you find him to be so radical and uncompromising that you just don't even know what to do with him. And then
yeah,
you have a little piece of that man's beliefs leaking into his conversation with his friends. And really the only vulnerable moment in the movie, other than when he's talking to his family, is when he admits to Sam that he actually went to one of Sam's concerts. He's in Boston. The electricity goes out right as he's about to sing, and it seems like the crowd is going to turn against him. And he uses his charisma and his beautiful voice and his ability to make the crowd experience this moment together. And I love that line Malcolm says, "I couldn't even hear you, but I could hear the chanting around me of everybody participating."
yeah,
And it was this beautiful moment where this unapologetically rigid man who is quote unquote always right admits to his friend that he saw this beauty, he has this vulnerability. I mean, granted, he's doing it in the service of trying to remind Sam that he has this power that he should be using.
right.
Um, but to answer your question about Shakespeare, the beauty of that play is that it has gotten us to this place where we can talk about struggle and being uncompromising in a way that we can see what the horrible outcome will be if we as a community don't come together and work through it together.
Yeah. So, you're right on. And that actually gives me I was going
Shakespeare
to,
scholars are now cringing all the
yeah,
world
might
over.
be, might be. Yeah, we're dealing with topics that others have studied much more deeply and extensively
But
than
the
us. But
beauty of Shakespeare is that I'm not a Shakespearean scholar. I don't speak Elizabethan
right.
English, but I can get this much out of that play.
Yeah. And I think great work allows you to get it wrong, right? So, okay, going back into Kemp Powers' background a little bit, because the writing on this is interesting to me. So again, our playwright and screenwriter, Kemp Powers, has a fascinating history in that. So when he was 14, he found a gun in his mom's closet and he pantomimed putting a bullet in a chamber and aimed it at his friend, pulled the trigger, shot and killed his friend. And so, yeah, crazy, right?
What?
Yes. And he wrestled with that for years. The friend's parents never pressed charges. He simply had to do a year of counseling. He was never held criminally liable. And he had this commitment. Like, I'm going to go on and do great things. I don't know exactly what that looked like for him, but he was then incensed by New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani's comment about like a 26-year-old black father who was wrongfully shot and killed by an investigator. Giuliani said that this man was no choir boy or was no altar boy and let that dangle in the public discourse when in reality, the victim was an altar boy as a child. So Powers later took that as a catalyst moment to reflect on his own experience on say Powers ended up on the receiving end of somebody's knife. Would Powers, who killed someone in his teenage years, simply be referred to as a former juvenile felon in that? Like, how does the world see me if something goes wrong in my life and see others like me? As he was doing work for his own memoir, he read about this fabled knight as he was researching the life of Muhammad Ali. It was, I think, in a throwaway paragraph, but he used his journalistic background to search what may or may not have transpired that night. He was fascinated by it as an exercise in what Black men do when they take off some of the masks that they are wearing in public, especially those who wear a lot of weight of public expectations and hope. And so he wanted to get a script together that allowed for a little bit more room to breathe and let people just be with one another. And the same thing, Regina King in directing this has said that this is, in some ways, this movie is a love letter to Black men. The maleness of this movie is really fascinating. How did that land for you in viewing? What's the...
I loved the maleness of this movie. And I say that with this interesting little caveat of it goes back to something you just said of being able to take off some masks.
Yeah.
And that's partly why I loved the scene in the motel room. You have these four men who have public personas, who are seen a certain way by their community in the world, and
Yeah.
they are brought together in this unassuming room. And they are just themselves. They have to interact as friends, as men of varying ages, of different marital statuses, of different wealth. You have Sam Cooke, who has just come from his very fancy suite in the White Hotel
Yeah.
and is like, this is a dump. Why are we spending time here? Cassius Clay is literally jumping on the beds and ready to embrace the world. But they get to this vulnerable place. And that is something that I just think men need more of, is seeing
Yeah.
vulnerability and seeing that being vulnerable is not weakness. These
Yeah.
men are all very strong. My opinions of them grew throughout the film. They did not shrink because these men have feelings.
Yeah.
In fact, it was these moments where, Malcolm is talking to Jim Brown while Sam and Cassius have gone out. And Malcolm admits to Jim that he's going to do this offshoot and that Cassius is actually a big part of the success of that. And Jim realizes what Malcolm is basically asking his friend to do. And that is a very vulnerable place to be. Malcolm is posturing the whole time, but he's clearly more comfortable with Jim in a one-on-one setting and is able to admit this thing that's been weighing on him so deeply, and he's able to admit this to Jim.
Yeah. So Powers has said, like, he finds himself in his daily life now, basically bouncing back and forth between the kind of Sam Cooke perspective and the Malcolm X perspective. And his view is that in the middle of a struggle, you kind of just need space for both. He refers to One Night in Miami as his Malcolm X movie, and Soul as his Sam Cooke movie when he refers to those out in public.
Which both came
And
out the same year, right?
they did, yes, which is so fun. What a year for Kemp
And,
Powers. Yeah,
COVID.
right. And then Regina King apparently offered some really fascinating material to help infuse something different into the film. So, she learned by getting in touch with, I think, Malcolm X's daughter, that he used to, because he was on the road a lot, leave notes and little scavenger hunts behind for them as a family so that when he wasn't home, he could at least feel connected to them and they could feel connected to him. And so we got this beautiful scene where he's on the phone with his daughter and demonstrates that, right? And Regina King asked Kemp Powers to write that into the movie. She called him up and said, "Hey, here's what I learned by doing background research and getting in touch with the family." One thing, though, that I think might kick at the knees of this project, you do get a very sanitized version of these men that is tough because a good chunk of what this movie is meant to do is force us to grapple with difficult realities in our society's DNA. I think in not noting just how deeply abusive Jim Brown was to women, to the point where I think there was an allegation of attempted murder, for example. I don't know Sam Cooke's history, but he comes up on a regular basis as like there's some
the
problematic elements
the
there.
situation around his death is a question mark as well.
And even though we not a whole lot comes up on Muhammad Ali in the years after this, you look at his many marriages, and there's really a disturbing sense of like this woman originally met Muhammad Ali when she was 6 years old, and then he got married to her when she was 17, and another woman I think he started a relationship with she was 16. There's a lot of engaging with minors that seems particularly frightening and disturbing, which again does not necessarily make this person evil by any stretch of the imagination. But if you're not dealing with the full person, because we try to turn them into gods rather than humans, you are perpetuating that same sin of not dealing with the difficult history that repeats itself unless you square up to it and gain some sense of what that means. And so I don't know, like the vulnerable maleness of this movie is really quite beautiful. But then when you know just a little more, then I am wanting more from the work itself, because these were real people who had very complicated, messy lives. And we do look to them as leaders in a movement that still resonate today. And we still want to learn lessons from these individuals. And I think you need the full picture in order to really square up to their legacy.
To me, the fact that you and I are having the conversation about the civil rights movement in the 60s and what that means for Black Americans today in the 2020s is an important outcome from a piece of media like this, where white people tend to look at one Black person as a representative of the entire community. And like you pointed out with Rudy Giuliani saying that person was no altar boy, it is very easy for white people to dismiss that person's point or their whole life if fault is found with them. By reckoning with what these men became or who they were in that moment in that way would veer the conversation in a completely different direction.
Yeah.
That's not the point of the film. It's interesting to me that Kemp Powers found this way into a conversation, and by putting it in the mouths of people that he was hoping we had at least heard of,
Yeah.
we could look at Malcolm X, who, if you know nothing about him other than the fact that he was this radical voice for Black liberation, you can understand the points he's making throughout the film. He becomes this mouthpiece for this way of thinking more so than he is Malcolm X saying these things. I don't know what Kemp Powers research included, but I would highly doubt that any of the things that were said in that hotel room were direct quotes from
Oh,
him.
right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it becomes it becomes an easy way for us to enter into the conversation because we've at least heard of these people. And I think it would invalidate the conversation for many people if we instead veered from civil rights and your responsibility as a famous Black man in the 60s. If
Yeah.
we then pivoted to, you guys are terrible to women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very fair.
I did want to point out, I loved from the early part of the film where we're getting the introductions on the characters,
Yeah.
that conversation that Jim Brown has in that southern plantation, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
The white man he's talking to is played by Beau Bridges, who,
Right.
if you have any knowledge of film history, the Bridges family is like Hollywood royalty.
Yes.
Lloyd Bridges, Beau Bridges, Jeff Bridges. There's a whole lineage here. And so I love that little detail of
Yeah.
grounding this scene with a white man you probably recognize from a family you probably recognize being this like quote unquote subtly racist because he's celebrating this Black
Right.
man. He's talking about all his accomplishments. He's
Right.
glowing with pride. But instead of accepting the help of a young man who is clearly very strong in
Right.
helping to move a dresser, this old man who's probably going to throw his back out refuses to let the young man into his house. It's fascinating, and actually just that was one of the things that kind of had my breath catch in my throat.
Yeah.
And leading out of that, I think I actually approached the film with a little bit more underlying dread than the film really warranted. And
Yeah.
this is actually something that I wanted to ask you is, did you have this underlying sense of dread throughout the film like I did?
Well, before I answer that, what were you dreading? What was the fear?
I felt like at any moment the outside world was going to bring itself into the room. And I was so nervous. I was nervous, like the way that it was shot when he left to go get when Malcolm left the room to get the camera and went
Yeah.
to the phone booth. It felt like I was in a horror flick. The way that the camera was tight on him
Yeah.
and you showed the people in the distance. I was on the edge of my seat, stressed out by an hour of conversation because I was nervous that the outside world would bring danger or threat of violence.
That's fascinating because you picked up on that lace of violence that is written into the movie in a way that is, I thought, very subtle, but if it left you on edge like that, that's really fascinating.
Maybe it's just me, I'm broken.
No, I don't think so. I think the movie absolutely gives us that. There's a reason that we keep having Malcolm X looking out the window constantly because you know what's out there is very hostile to what's happening in here. I think missed it because I know Regina King from comedy. So I did go a different direction in my read of that moment. I felt like we were reading Bridges as an Obama '08 voter, right? And then, storm to the Capitol. That's how I read this person. So Regina King, I first was introduced to her through the Boondocks, where she plays two children, one of whom is a very thoughtful conspiracy theorist, and one of the there's just so few shows that can get away with a line like Jesus was black, Reagan was the devil, and George Bush did 9/11, and just like leave it there unchallenged. It's a show that is very unapologetic in allowing its characters to be both problematic and insightful at the same time, and letting both exist in a very free flowing way. And I thought we would get more. I thought that was what we were maybe going to get here, was just the combination of like problematic and insightful and letting those two things exist together. I thought we were going to get something a little more wicked as a result, just because of some assumptions that I have based on Regina King's body of work. So no, I didn't have dread so much as like I kind of had almost like a gleeful anticipation that was misplaced. And so then maybe we pivot to the question: who do we think this was for? What was the intended audience? Even though we kind of gave that away with the creator's intent. Any other thoughts on who this might appeal to?
I'd say this is a conversation actually you and I have been having. We've been in dialogue about this for probably a better part of 3 years or so. And it started with, I had season tickets to the Shakespeare Theater Company, and there was a show, Macbeth in Stride, that was almost entirely a black cast, and I had a knee-jerk reaction of, Is it wrong for me to take a seat in this theater? Am I the audience? Are they talking to me? Am I being brash by coming into this theater, assuming that all theater is for me? And then when you said that you would come with me, I called them, and the only seats available were in the front row. Of course, we enjoyed it, and being in the front row was a little nerve-wracking because they did, in fact, interact with the front row, which I was very, very scared about. But that actually, I think, has started a dialogue with you and I about something that really, I was very conscious of the fact that I didn't think I was the audience. But having watched this movie, I do think there's an element of, I am the audience. I am the people. I am the person. Regina King and Kemp Power are trying to reach with this. This is what we talk about. This is what we struggle with. This is what our community is dealing with. While you're off living your life, we're talking about how to keep our children alive. We're talking
Yeah.
about how to engage in the world in a way that makes us safe.
Yeah, I think this is meant for everybody. This is an empathy machine, and I think it is invitational. It is accessible. It is, maybe a little too broad almost in some ways. It sands off some potentially hard edges, and maybe that's okay for the audience that this is probably reaching. The way that I landed on it was, it feels like a rest stop. It's like, for if somebody has been struggling for a long time, which we have been in this country forever. And 60 years after the events of this movie, we're in a post George Floyd world that suggests that we haven't moved very far in terms of how we try to evade dealing with the root sins upon which our country was founded. And this is an accessible entry point to try to invite people, I think, to engage in that conversation. If you've been struggling for a while and come to this movie, I think it's a place to breathe a little easier and be like, oh, people of course wrestle with these same big questions, and it's okay for me to wrestle. So yeah, I think it's a very has a very broad appeal and very broad accessibility. Like, I think it succeeds in that objective.
Yeah.
Audiences seem to think so too. But
Where
yeah,
Julius X was a 301 course, I would say this is a 101 course. This is
yes,
an easy on-ramp for people who may not be thinking about this day to day
yeah,
to enter the conversation, to, as you said, like, round and
yes.
engage.